Good morning. I'm John Degnan, Chairman of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, and on behalf of the Port Authority and on behalf of Lee Sander, who's Chairman of the Regional Plan Association, and our co-sponsors, Amtrak, the MTA, and New Jersey Transit, welcome to the inaugural Trans-Hudson Transportation Summit. We've gathered here this morning the leaders of the transportation agencies that together keep the nation's busiest and most complex metropolis moving every day, as well as other key stakeholders in our regional transportation network. All of them are experts in the challenges we face in maintaining and expanding that network in the years to come. Today we begin what I hope will be a focused and urgent conversation about those challenges and the way we can work together to solve them in this decade and beyond. I'm very pleased that we're live streaming today's proceedings on the internet, and we'll invite public comment on these discussions so that we may benefit from the insights of our broader community. Before we start, though, I want to say a word of thanks to the working group within the Port Authority and our sister agencies, as well as the Regional Plan Association, who have worked over the past several months to make this event a reality. When I first sat down with Tom Wright of the RPA not long after becoming chairman last summer, we discussed the idea for this event. I could not have hoped for a better outcome than our meeting here today. I'd especially like to thank Dan Schneid of the RPA and Portia Henry of the Port Authority for their coordination of the summit planning team. The example of young leaders like that gives me great optimism for the future of transportation planning in our region. It's no accident that we meet today at One World Trade Center, the most prominent symbol of the rebirth of this vital regional commercial and transit center after the tragic events of 9/11. Many who are here today had a hand in this effort, and I hope that this stunning vista that surrounds us here will inspire us all to bring the same energy and intellect and drive that has rebuilt the World Trade Center to the tasks before us involving interstate and regional transportation infrastructure. The idea of this symposium was generated in the report, Keeping the Region Moving, that was submitted in December by the special panel appointed by Governors Cuomo and Christie to address the future of the Port Authority. Scott Reckler and I sat on that panel. Among its many recommendations, all of which have been endorsed by the two governors, was to refocus the Port Authority on its core mission, transportation infrastructure. The time is right to do just that. The World Trade Center revitalization, evident all around us today, is nearing completion, and immediate attention now needs to be placed on the challenges we'll be discussing today. Today's symposium was also called for specifically in that report, and I'm particularly grateful to be partnering this morning with the highly respected Regional Planning Association, whose work I have admired since the 1970s when I was a young assistant counsel in Brenda Burns' office in New Jersey, and when we needed expert planning consultation, it was people like the Port Authority and those who now work at the Regional Planning Association. Tom's too young, I think, to have been part of that, but it's been a delight to work with them. A short list of the challenges we jointly face will suffice to underscore the gravity of this moment in the history of the region's transportation system. The tunnels, which link Manhattan with the rest of the region, are suffering the effects of both age and, more recently, catastrophic weather. Our rail and bus transit systems face substantial operating deficits, even as the public demand for investment in new and existing facilities becomes more pressing. And our network of bridges, which has not been substantially augmented for more than half a century, will require significant investments simply to continue to play its vital role in the regional movement of people and goods. Each of these challenges will make a significant call on the public's resources, and each will in some measure compete with the others for those limited resources. So how do we begin together to tackle these daunting and complex public needs? We know that long-term solutions will require the policy and financial support of federal, state, and local governments, and the voters they serve, not to mention the resources and creativity of the private sector. We know that these Herculean tasks will require careful balancing of the region's pressing transportation needs with compelling public interests in environmental preservation and the protection of neighborhoods. But we also know that inaction is not an option. We must act if we are to fulfill our obligations to support the ongoing economic, cultural, and social progress that has made this region among the most exciting and dynamic on Earth. I'd like to suggest that one way to begin would be to view today's proceedings not as a discrete event, but as the beginning of a focused 12-month series of discussions among our agencies and with key regional stakeholders to develop a comprehensive vision of the way forward and an integration of all of the efforts that will be required of us on a going forward basis. In that spirit, we will begin today's meeting with a series of brief presentations by each agency's co-sponsor to further illuminate the challenges we face in the work that is already underway to address them. In this morning's second session, Tom Wright, of the RPA, will moderate an open discussion among us with the assistance of a panel of regional experts to explore the common elements of our individual priorities and the tensions among them. I, for one, hope that this will be a spirited and thought-provoking discussion. Then this afternoon, we will address two of the so-called elephants in the room that inevitably will attend our efforts. First, how will we pay for this long list of gargantuan infrastructure projects? And secondly, how will we effectively navigate the myriad environmental and regulatory processes that must be completed before we can even begin? If, as is likely, we end today with more questions than answers, I hope that we will also gain new energy for the challenges ahead from the knowledge that we are, in the truest sense, all in this together. And I look forward to working with my colleagues from Amtrak, the MTA, and New Jersey Transit, with the support of RPA and other leaders in our transportation community, to ensure that today will be an important step in a regional conversation whose stakes cannot be overstated. Thank you again for joining us this morning. I'll now turn it over to Lee Sander, Chairman of the RPA, who will make some remarks. Lee? Thank you.
Thank you, John, for those really wonderful remarks. Good morning to you all. Also, we are delighted at RPA to co-sponsor the event, and we have a great representation from RPA. We have an RPA board member to my right. We also have an RPA board member on leave over on the far corner, Director Foy. But great to see many old friends and make some new friends here. The RPA, first and foremost, beginning with its creation in 1923, has had as its core mission advancement of a regional infrastructure agenda to ensure the economic, environmental, and social health of our tri-state region. We are proud of the key role the Regional Plan Association has played in the creation and development of the Port Authority, and subsequently with the design, development, construction, and operation of the Port Authority's extraordinary transportation network. It even goes beyond that. We have been, for the duration of the existence of the Port Authority, we've been committed to the Port Authority as an institution, something I know, John, from our conversation earlier, you hold dearly, in terms of ensuring that the Port Authority comes back to the excellence that it's had under, with Pat's leadership and Scott's and yours and so forth, given the events of the last several years. This partnership is a key part of RPA's legacy, and we believe it is an important part of what has made the region as successful as it has been. We are here today to begin a new chapter in that partnership. That is what this meeting today is all about. On behalf of the RPA, I'd like to express our deep appreciation to Chairman Degnan and Vice Chairman Reckler for their leadership in beginning to move us forward, and as part of this effort, the opportunity to co-sponsor the event. We are also honored to work with the Port and the other key public sector partners in this exercise, Amtrak, New Jersey Transit, and the MTA and City DOT with Commissioner Trottenberg, entities that we have a little familiarity with to move the ball forward. The challenges the region faces in many ways are as dramatic as they were when the Port Authority was created almost 100 years ago. There is the urgent need to deal with the calamitous shape of our existing tunnels beneath the Hudson, the need to build additional rail capacity to support the continued growth and health of the region, the need to ensure that our public sector institutions have the public and the political and the public support to advance this agenda, the need for political and institutional collaboration across the river, and the need for civic stakeholders like RPA and our other brethren in the civic community in that space to help carry that banner. The stakes that are involved here, both near and long term, are no secret to this audience. We applaud the progress that has been made in beginning Gateway. That was for you. I heard it. Okay. Through the leadership of Chairman Kosha and with the collaboration of MTA. I know Tom is not here, but again, his team, represented by Bill and Bill Wheeler and other folks, I'm sure, from MTA. Related, I saw Jay Kriegel out there earlier. Jay, where are you? And Vernado. The advancement of Gateway, together with the MTA's capital program, are the two highest priorities RPA has. We know that the political, institutional, funding, and technical lifting that is in front of us is quite large. At the same time, when we have all worked together to advance the region's agenda, we have often achieved what no one expected we could do, and I am optimistic that we can and will do so again with the leadership of you two gentlemen and the team over here and there. As you all know, RPA is in the business of doing plans and, of course, making them happen. Bob Yar recruited me to become chairman of RPA. He said our hit rate is about 80%. I don't know if that was before ARC or not ARC, but we have a pretty good track record, John, of making things happen. And so for the most part, a lot of this is also taking the longer view. So in addition to the conversation about what we need to do to advance Gateway, for the fourth regional plan, which is what we are now doing, we also look at what more needs to be done in the broader 25-year timeline. This includes, in addition to making Gateway happen, addressing the crisis at the Port Authority bus terminal, which is crumbling into decay and cannot serve its existing passengers with a modern level of service, let alone the growth projected for the future. Looking at the potential extension of the Sub-7 line out to New Jersey, either directly out to Secaucus, as our RPA board member, Jerry Gottesman, head of Essen Parking, has proposed, and as was proposed under Mayor Bloomberg, or to Secaucus via Jersey City, as others have suggested, like Jim Simpson, Lefrax, and Jim Greller, and others. What needs to be done with PATH to connect it to the rest of the region's transit network as well, and the key expansions of the interstate ferry and bus networks. Again, this is the broader 25-year frame and is, complementary to the immediate crisis that we have at hand with the tunnels. During my tenure at the MTA, we established the president of the football trains with joint operations through Penn Station by Metro North and New Jersey Transit. Again, Bill, thank you for your leadership in making that happen. We believe the potential to further align and possibly integrate operations is something that we also have to look at again, not for the immediate term, but for the longer run. Not easy, but can be done, as we demonstrated with the football trains. In conclusion, we all know the key to getting this done is leadership, both at a political and institutional level. It's certainly not the technical. I mean, the technical stuff is hard, and we have to make sure we keep these projects as close to budget as possible. We have a few folks here from the A&E world. It's part of their job in the construction community. But the biggest challenge, I'm sure you all agree, is the political and the institutional. That is why, again, RPA is so pleased to see the initiative our public sector partners are taking, the leadership Chairman Degnan has taken with Vice Chairman Reckler, the support from Executive Director Pat Foy and so forth, and why RPA is fully committed to doing our part, as our predecessors did before us, to build on what was done in the past, from which we have benefited so much from, and to ensure the future health of the region. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Scott Reckler, Vice Chair of the Port Head Lead. Thank you very much for your comments and for your support of RPA today. John, thank you for your leadership on pushing for this event, and I appreciate the team from the RPA and the Port Authority, both staffs who worked so hard to make today a reality. Also like to thank the New York MTA, New Jersey Transit, Amtrak, U.S. Department of Transportation, all the different agencies and organizations for participating in this inaugural Trans-Hudson Transportation Summit. It's great to have so many different agencies working together. We're going to be talking about a lot of daunting challenges here this morning. So I'm an optimist by nature, so I wanted to start with some positive thoughts along the way. And that is, as I think through where we are, New York City and the New York City region is in one of the most enviable positions of any places in the world. I mean, if you think about it, in a 21st century, globally integrated, idea-based economy, the number one most important ingredient for success is talent. And New York City is a magnet for talent, right? The best and brightest from around the world, they want to come live in New York, they want to come work in New York, they want to visit New York, and the statistics prove it. Look at the job growth that we've seen in New York City. Look at the population rates we've seen in New York City and in the surrounding region. Look at the record tourism rates. Look at the number of college graduates that have moved to New York City over the last 5 years. It's doubled. It's more than any other place in the entire country, and they're coming to New York. And as they come to New York, this attracts some of the most dynamic, fastest growing companies from around the world that want to take advantage of that talent. So you're seeing the Googles expand, the Facebooks expand. You even saw Cadillac move from Detroit to relocate their corporate headquarters to New York because they wanted to be able to access the creativity, the innovation of the talent that lives in the New York region. So we have a lot to be hopeful for, and this is self-reinforcing. The more that we have talent come, the more companies come. The more companies come, more talent is attracted. As a matter of fact, The Economist recently came out with a study, and they ranked the most competitive cities in the world. And New York, out of the top 25, ranked number one. And what was interesting to me was not only did it rank number one, when they did their study, they said New York would be number one through 2025. And when the ranking was based on what's the quality of life, what culture's there, what's the living standards there, what's the quality of the employment pool, and what's the infrastructure to support this community. So, we're in a very good situation from that standpoint. But as we all know, our continued success is going to be on being able to move all of these people that come to our region through our transportation network. And not only the people that are here today, but the millions more that are expected to come in the future. And the other thing that's happened, as New York City has become so successful, the workforce and office users and jobs are starting to move, right? We've seen it in the boroughs to Brooklyn and Long Island City, and the suburbs, and the waterfront of New Jersey and northern New Jersey suburbs, which again has put more stress on our system. And the demographic of the young millennials are more interested in using public transportation. And I'm sure we'll hear the statistics today in terms of the rising increase of the subway systems and rail systems and bus systems. The mass transit is more important to them than car ridership or car commuting. So the growing Trans-Hudson challenge comes down to moving millions of people back and forth across this river is one of the biggest challenges that we face to ensure that as we go forward, New York City stays in this leadership position. New York just recently, it was announced, passed the mark of 20 million people living in this region, which is the first region in the country to do so. The forecasting over the next 30 years, our population is going to grow by another 16%, which would lead to 50% more people using morning transit ridership. So for those who commuted this morning by a subway, think about your subway ride in and think about increasing that by 50% and how congested that was. Or for those who drive around the New York City streets, think about how congested that has been as we've gone forward. And while the region has done nothing but continue to grow, we're using the same rail tunnels that were built 100 years ago and bridges and tunnels that haven't been expanded since the 1960s. The fact that we're able to move so many people across the Hudson River is truly a marvel and a testament to the operational ingenuity on the part of the New Jersey Transit, Amtrak, the MTA, and the Port Authority. But if we're going to remain competitive, we have to do more than just develop ways to operate. We have to expand our capacity across the Hudson. And as John said, both governors recognized this when they endorsed the recommendations of the special panel on the future of the Port Authority, which called for a comprehensive planning effort to develop new solutions for the Trans-Hudson challenge. And today's summit is what I hope will be one of the many conversations to do just that. But we need to challenge ourselves to think beyond the status quo and to think strategically in developing 21st century solutions to what are 21st century challenges. One good example of that is the Port Authority bus terminal that we've discussed earlier and will continue to discuss. As we all know, the bus terminal plays an integral role in moving hundreds of thousands of people across the Hudson River every day. In 1 hour during the morning rush, buses passing through the Lincoln Tunnel to the terminal carry more people than any other transit line in the country. That includes the increasingly crowded MTA Lexington line. The original Port Authority bus terminal was built in 1950, which is around the time that Ralph Cramden was the most famous bus driver in the country. Ridership at the time was 130,000 passengers a day. Since that time, we've expanded the bus terminal in different ways, and now there's 230,000 people that pass through the terminal every day, which is more use than even Grand Central Terminal. Over the next 25 years, ridership is forecasted to climb to 337,000 daily passengers, a 50% increase in ridership. To move that many people, it would require 1,027-ton buses during the evening rush hour. Now think about that. If we place those buses end to end, they would stretch over 8.5 miles, long enough to go back and forth 5 times between New Jersey and Manhattan through the Lincoln Tunnel. The Port Authority was recently presented with a plan to replace the bus terminal, and in a manner that increased the cost by, that had a cost of about $10.5 billion. Under this plan, we have a bigger, larger terminal in Manhattan, but transportation access across the Hudson would remain virtually the same. So while we'd be increasing the size of the bus terminal, the congestion within the Lincoln Tunnel and on the streets of Manhattan still would not have increased capacity. And to me, that's like trying to force 10 pounds of bologna into a 5-pound bag. It's a 20th century solution to a 21st century problem. At the same time, the Port Authority is looking to replace the bus terminal. As we heard, Amtrak has put forward their proposal for the Gateway project, which is forecasted to be about a $15 billion project to build a new rail tunnel under the Hudson River. That's nearly $30 billion for 2 separate mega projects that would create only one additional rail option in and out of Manhattan. So today's summit presents an opportunity to begin the dialogue and ask the kind of questions to best develop solutions to address regional challenges like replacing the bus terminal and expanding rail access to New York. And we got to ask tough questions. For example, should we be building the bus terminal on the other side of the Hudson River in New Jersey instead of building a multi-billion-dollar bus terminal on some of the most expensive, most valuable land in the world? Should we build more than one bus terminal, one to take people to Midtown, one to take people to Lower Manhattan as Lower Manhattan continues to grow and connect to those rails? Can we better utilize our existing infrastructure, such as a PATH, New Jersey Transit, the Hudson-Bergen Light Rail, to move more people across the Hudson? Should we think more broadly about using our waterways through ferries? Right now, there's 25,000 people that cross the river through ferries. If you go to cities that have waterways like ours, whether that's Sydney, Australia, or Hong Kong, you look out the window in the morning, it looks like they're being attacked by ferries. And we haven't used our waterways, in my opinion, as much as we should be. And then what are the best ways to reduce congestion on our bridges and tunnels and our increasingly congested Manhattan streets? How can we effectively monetize the Port Authority's real estate in Midtown, where the current bus terminal is located, to help pay for a new bus terminal or a new tunnel? This is the point of coming together at summits like this, and we have to think broader than we've been doing in the past. We have to think out of the box, and we have to think holistically for what type of solutions can solve our problems today, and as Lee said, 25 years down the road. You know, we should be looking for innovative ways to develop and pay for these mega projects, public-private partnerships, monetizing underutilized real estate, different forms of congestion pricing. They all got to be considered. Projects like Gateway and replacing the bus terminal should be developed in a comprehensive, holistic manner that best addresses the needs of the region for the long term. The Port Authority was created to solve these sorts of problems, but the Port Authority can't do it alone. This is a challenge facing the entire region, and it requires a regional partnership with New Jersey Transit, the MTA, the Port Authority, Amtrak, the federal government, to develop the most comprehensive 21st century solution to this Trans-Hudson challenge. We all know it's not going to be easy, but it's necessary if our region is going to thrive in the future. And as Lee said, it's going to require real leadership. And you know, as we've seen and we've lived through here, the public doesn't have a lot of faith right now in government projects and government agencies. And rightfully so, based on some of our performance. We need to change that. And the fact that we're starting with dialogue and the cooperation of so many agencies here and so many people from the community and civic groups to come together and be creative is, in my opinion, a very optimistic start to what hopefully is an optimistic plan for the future. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Scott, Lee, John. I'm Tom Wright, President of Regional Plan Association. I want to thank everyone for being here. As was said earlier, in particular, the team that pulled this together, Dan Schned, Portia, Sean, David, the folks at the Port Authority, the interagency team. The work over the last couple months to pull together the program this morning, I think, has been really extraordinary, and part of the partnership that I think is going to be necessary to get us over the finish line on this. I have to say, as I'm sitting up there on the corner and I look around, Lee, Martin, and I are the three people up here today who don't collect a public sector paycheck. We don't, well, I know you don't either, Chairman, but you guys don't either. But we have a kind of special role here because we're civic advocates, and part of our job is to kind of push on these issues where everybody else up here has to deliver on them, has to come up with the financing and convince people who have to face the wrath of the voters that it's worth doing. They have to figure out the engineering. They have to work with the consultants and everybody, and they have to actually make this happen. And I know that we have a different role. In some ways, I think of ourselves a little bit, we're kind of ministers, we're proselytizers. My grandfather was actually an Episcopal bishop down in Eastern Carolina, and he spent the 50s and 60s traveling up and down the coast. And sometimes I feel a little bit like that myself as I go to these agencies. And I think of a story my grandfather had, which was he would spend every Sunday giving a sermon in some small community, and then he would have a supper in the house of a local deacon and kind of church leader. And he liked to tell a story about one day sitting down to the meal, and the wife, the mother in the house, said to her son Johnny, would he say the grace before the meal? And the little boy says, you know, Mom, I'm not sure what to say. And she says, well, just say the prayer your father said at breakfast this morning. And the little boy looks down and he says, oh, Lord, why does Bishop Wright have to come to my house for dinner tonight? And I sometimes wonder if, Ronnie, if folks at the MTA or Amtrak or the Port Authority will feel that way when we're showing up for supper as the RPA. So it's with that kind of special appreciation I want to thank the civic partners who've come together today and given us an opportunity to talk about this. And Scott and John, I think that report that the Port Authority put out over the winter was an extraordinary document, and it leads to this kind of discussion. And this is where we need to go, which is to be able to put these issues on the table, bring up an understanding of what we're confronting, and start to put together the alliances that we're going to need to get this done. The idea for this morning program is that for the next hour or so, we're going to have 4 presentations, one from each of the agencies. This will kind of bring up the level of understanding of the issues, present the issues of this extraordinary Hudson River, which is such an amazing backdrop here for our conversation, and give us all a foundation for a conversation afterwards where we can start to talk about, tease out what roles are different institutions going to have to play, what is not happening that needs to happen, and how do these different possibilities and options work together. So it's a pleasure for me now to turn this over to Andrew Lynn from the Port Authority, who's going to talk a little bit about what the Port Authority sees as the issues. Andrew, take it away.
Thank you, and good morning to all of you. I'm going to focus just on a part of the overall interstate network, which is mainly the province of the Port Authority, others, New Jersey Transit, New York City, the MTA, and Amtrak. We'll talk about other networks that extend beyond my focus on the river crossings into the region at large. But these crossings are only part of a whole system, but they are a choke point. We have the busiest bus terminal in the country and the busiest train station in the country and the largest city in the country, and it's connected across the Hudson River and the Arthur Kill to New Jersey by just a very few crossings. And as you can see on the map, we have the George Washington into Manhattan and the core central business district. We have the George Washington Bridge, 5 vehicular tunnels, 2 commuter intercity rail tracks, and 4 path rail tracks. Given the fact that 1.8 million trips are made back and forth every day across those crossings and the Staten Island bridges, this is a fairly slim and lean network for the challenge ahead of us. And as has been pointed out, the rail tunnels are over 100 years old, and the bridges are 50 or well over 50 years old. Over the last 50 years, we have not laid a single lane of roadway or a single track of rail across the waterways into Manhattan. Yet, remarkably, we've managed to move an additional 400,000 people a day back and forth across the river. This is a remarkable achievement by all the agencies involved, as well as the private sector. And the way it's been done, as you can see from the different bands on the slide, is by mass transit. The auto and truck, which is in the red, has maintained a relative stability over this time, but the transit share, which is below the red, has grown quite significantly. I'd like to point out that it's a balanced system. You have significant bands for bus, path, rail, and ferry. Please note that the largest band in the tan is for the buses. They are the real workhorses on this network. This slide shows you how the pie is, 1, expanded, and 2, the growth of transit again. Back in 1980, transit represented 62% of the trips. Now it's 77%. And it appears like it will continue to grow. One result of this is an economic reality, which is that each transit ride generally involves a government subsidy. That's not unique to this region. It's pretty much a national and international phenomenon. But it just means that as we have more of a transit system on this interstate network, there's economic stress and economic demands that are placed on everybody involved. This slide shows you the travel patterns. Each dot on the map represents 5 commuters, and they are color-coded by mode. As you can see, the red and the yellow are the cars and buses, and they're dispersed much more widely than the others. The different shades of blue represent path and commuter rail, and they're more condensed and focused in certain areas where there are rail lines. The fairy dots, which you probably will have trouble seeing, are even more narrowly focused in the areas around the actual crossings. And what this is meant to show is that there's a great quality about having the many modes on our network here. They serve different geographical areas and markets. And so that balance among the modes has really been critical to enhancing mobility in the entire region. We think of the Lincoln Tunnel, I imagine most of us, as a motor vehicle, a truck and an automobile crossing. But really at key points in the day, it changes and is a mass transit corridor. During the peak period, 22% of the vehicles moving across the tunnel are buses, but they carry 89% of the passengers. The change in the system to more transit and fewer automobiles and cars is not something that happened by accident. There was, over an extended period of time, decades, a concerted effort by New Jersey Transit, by the Port Authority, by private companies, bus carriers, New York Waterway, Billy Bay on the ferries, help from the MTA and the city to make this transition to more transit. Not only was it not by accident, but it was really not by choice, because we could not have moved an additional 400,000 people without the shift to transit. I'm just going to highlight here a few of the key elements of that effort. It's been a multi-project, multi-agency, and sustained effort over time, and when you add it all up, it's really quite impressive. The Port Authority introduced the express bus lane, which, as we've heard earlier today, operates almost like a train line on steroids. Billy Bay and New York Waterway, working with government agencies, reintroduced the ferry system. New Jersey Transit made a series of sustained and major investments over time to make sure that their commuter rail system was the fastest growing in the country and provided much better service. Buses got bigger with more seats, trains became longer, double-decker cars were introduced. All of this increased capacity without having to invest in a new rail line. Electronic tolling allowed for greater throughput at the crossings and variable rate pricing, which enabled the shifting of demand from peak periods to other times of the day. Low bus tolls encourage more efficient use of the roadways with buses. So all of this is really quite impressive. The question will be, over the next period of time, can we sustain it, or do we need to make more significant investments in infrastructure? One very interesting phenomenon of just the last decade has been what's happening with automobiles on the crossings. For the first time ever, for 8 straight years, there have been 8 successive declines in the number of cars on the Port Authority crossings, for an overall 11% drop in traffic. What's remarkable about this is not only the drop, but that it's occurred in a period where there's largely been economic growth in the region. Essentially, this drop has brought automobile traffic on the crossings back to where it was in 1986. We don't know if this trend will continue in the future or flatten out or be reversed, but it does seem to be a signal, once again, that transit is going to be the key to our future. Over the next 40 years, we're expecting continued steady growth in regional population and employment, pretty much at the same rate we've encountered in the last 30 years. And one other feature of this is the share of population west of the Hudson in the region is creeping up year by year. All of this means, as Vice Chairman Reckler pointed out, that the forecasts are for growth on all the different modes of transit. I'm just showing those that go across the river here, but in each case, it's looking like a 30 to 50% or greater growth in forecast demand in the next 25 years. So it will be very challenging and probably impossible to meet and sustain that kind of growth without major new investments in a rail tunnel and in bus infrastructure. Now I'm going to turn to what the Port Authority is doing to address this situation. One thing that I think has occurred without anybody really focusing on it is that we are embarked on the greatest bridge building effort the region has seen since the 1920s, 30s, 40s. We have in our capital budget almost $8 billion that's going towards this effort. It reflects the fact that our bridges are very old and basically need to be replaced or have major elements of them replaced. The George Washington Bridge will be getting new suspender ropes, a main cable, and an upper roadway. The Goethals Bridge is being replaced entirely. The Bayonne Bridge roadway is being replaced and raised. The Lincoln Helix, which connects on the Jersey side to the tunnel, will be totally replaced while keeping it still operating. And then we've invested heavily in a new Pulaski Skyway and Whitpen Bridge as part of the Lincoln Tunnel Access Project. Each of these projects is over $1 billion. On the pass system, we are investing heavily in repairing our tunnels in the wake of Hurricane Sandy and making the entire system more resilient in the face of extreme weather, which is coming with greater frequency. We're completing a new signal system with positive train control that will enhance safety and increase capacity. And we're introducing longer 10-car trains to the downtown Manhattan Newark service. I would say, with respect to that last one, as the building we're in fills up and the other office buildings at the World Trade Center fill up, there's going to be a tremendous surge in demand on that line into Lower Manhattan, and it will be very important to complete these projects to accommodate it. Our biggest maybe I'm pressing the wrong, here we go. Our biggest challenge is the bus terminal. We have a terminal that's now past its useful life, operating over capacity every workday. It's so congested that buses spill out onto the city streets in the evening peak. We are not delivering the quality of service at the terminal that we would like in terms of on-time arrival and departure of buses or the amenities and experience that passengers have when they come in. Our terminal was built for much smaller buses than we have today, and in fact cannot accommodate some of the buses we now. The buses are longer, taller, and heavier, and the bi-level buses cannot be accommodated in most of the facility. In addition, we suffer from inadequate bus parking and staging and circulation space. Perhaps most importantly, the structure of the facility is past its useful life, and in the next 15 to 25 years will need to be replaced. And to address this structural issue, it is really going to be a critical requirement that we build a new terminal. By that time, roughly 20 or a few more years from now, it's really a mandatory issue, building a new terminal. It's not a discretionary choice if we're going to maintain bus service. The scope of the challenge is daunting. We have 230,000 passengers today. We're anticipating by 2040 a 100,000 person a day increase. That means we'll be having to accommodate, if things go according to the forecast, 42,000 passengers an hour in the PM peak and 1,000 buses. That's what we are planning for at this point. The actual construction of this is extremely difficult because we need to keep the terminal operating at the same time that we're replacing it. And then we need to enlarge it to accommodate 50, up to 50% or 30 to 50% more people. That's 100,000 people a day. And when you add all this up, this translates into a 5-level facility of terminals, ramps, staging, and parking covering 3.5 city blocks. The estimated cost for accommodating all of this demand in Manhattan is between $7.5 and $10.5 billion. We're looking at whether we can do this through other means, as Vice Chairman Reckler pointed out. Does it make sense to have all of this bus activity in Manhattan, or can we have a smaller footprint? But in any event, we will have to replace what we have today with some new bus terminal. Finally, I'd just like to say the region has a tremendous amount at stake in addressing these problems on the network, the buses, and all the others. Right now, there are 570,000 commuters who regularly cross back and forth across the waterways between New York and New York City and New Jersey. Collectively, that's $50 billion in annual wages. We want that to grow, and addressing that with new bus facilities and a new tunnel will be critical. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. So now I'm going to turn over to Drew Galloway from Amtrak, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the Northeast Corridor, maybe scale it up a bit. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. Good morning. My pleasure to be up here and talk on one particular initiative that we've heard mentioned already, which is the Gateway program itself. And it is an initiative on one mode of a multi-mode discussion that is here today. But from an Amtrak perspective, we think there is perhaps nothing more important to bring to attention for everybody. I'm going to go back a few years to November 27th, 1910. And the reason for thinking about that is on that day, there was a wonderful new station that opened. That was Penn Station. That was the first day it opened. Unfortunately, also on that day, it was the same day that concluded Trans-Hudson rail crossing construction. And if you haven't thought about it much, that's 104 years and 161 days from now. Hopefully, we're going to do something about that and change that. In talking about Amtrak, we bring the inner city component into this discussion. And I think the terrific discussion that Andy had really focused on a lot of the local and community areas. But the Northeast Corridor is arguably the most important inner city passenger rail system in the nation as well. The typical Amtrak trip is 175 miles. It's more on Acela and a little less on regional. Those passengers, if they weren't riding on the train, would in fact be in a regional airline heading to LaGuardia or JFK or Newark or other locations. So the inner city component is actually another dimension that comes into play in a very large way. When we define the Northeast Corridor, it's really from Virginia, which has a very rapid growing component to it, up to Boston, Massachusetts. And what's shown in the color coding are the individual operators at various locations along the Northeast Corridor. The pie chart also demonstrates the relative apportionment of train movements in there. And while the Amtrak system and the operation looks pretty small, in fact, we operate over half the train miles. That gets back to the inner city dimension and having passengers on a vehicle that's traveling a long distance and operating in an integral fashion on the corridor. It's also a facility, you don't see it much in the New York area except in and around the Hellgate and Oak Point, where there is freight service that occupies on the Northeast Corridor as well as commuter service, and Penn Station operations. Penn Station operations today exceed all that we see combined for Boston, Philadelphia, and Washington. The chart to the right is a graphic illustration. That big spike in the middle, which is a green, that's the Long Island Railroad, New Jersey Transit, and Amtrak operations all coming into Penn Station. 21 tracks, 1,300 train movements a day. It's unmatched by any other facility in the hemisphere, not just the nation. There's been a lot of discussion about growth. We've undertaken our own independent analysis on ridership trends. It's being really evaluated and corroborated by the FRA through the NEC Future process and many other studies. 250 million trips today on the Northeast Corridor. The expectation is that will likely double if, and only if, the investment can be made, both on capacity for rail lines, at stations, and in equipment itself and the ability to handle that. If not, then we will be simply unable to accommodate that, because the current system, like the Port Authority bus terminal, basically like most of the airlines, is operating at capacity today. This is an illustration, and Andy had it in a similar fashion, in a terrific presentation there, showing the relationship between New York itself, the surrounding areas, the travel patterns, the density of travel patterns, and what an integral system and process and community this is. It does not function in its own separate way and can only offer really the economic powerhouse that it is in functioning in this integral manner. When I look at this picture, I'm afraid all of you have been in that experience. And it's not a pretty one. This used to be a picture that we could cite that was typical of a commuter afternoon trip around 4 or 5 or maybe 6 p.m. This picture was taken at 2:30 in the afternoon. And the station itself is continuously used, continuously overcrowded, unfortunately, and the ability for it to expand in any meaningful way is simply not possible without a major investment to accommodate it. And that gets to the Gateway program, which on a 500-mile long corridor, it's only 10 miles, but is an incredibly dense and complicated area for those 10 miles. In a nutshell, it's taking a 2-track railroad that exists today between Newark, New Jersey, and Penn Station, New York, making it a 4-track railroad. And some of the major investment elements are arrayed on the bottom in adding new station facilities, in adding major structures over the Hackensack River with the Portal Bridge projects, new tunnels under the Hudson River, and expansion in and out of New York. It's in an area, and when you think back to the previous slide with the density of train traffic, which is about 450 trains a day, then this is an area that's incredibly difficult to expand under those traffic conditions, but equally as vital and important to do so. We have established a set of principles in thinking about the program itself. And the first and foremost was to preserve the opportunity to expand in the future in a rapidly expanding economy and development in and around the New York area. That became a very serious thing. I'll talk about that in a little while and why it was also a successful outcome for us with Hudson Yards. It's not the only location. There are critical locations in the 10-mile stretch I've talked about that must be preserved, or we will forfeit the opportunity to expand the program in the future. The second major principle is around resiliency. And unfortunately, a 500-year storm has left an indelible impact on all of us. It has brought to front and center the fragility of this system. Two chairmen, a vice chairman, and a director before me all brought this point out about age and the vulnerability of the system. I'm in pretty good company in that and talking about it. And it has become a day-to-day issue for us. And the last component is expand the system itself. Develop the capacity to really 100% under the Hudson River, an expansion of some nature in Penn Station itself, and build it for more stable and reliable operations that simply don't exist today because of the congestion and volume of trains on a very limited system. Hudson Yards, the Eastern Hudson Yards. And Jay, we can all look at that with pride. I'm really going to point towards the picture on the right side of this screen. Without the collaboration of a group like this, without the leadership that was provided by many, we would not be able to talk about a successful outcome in there. It's a recognition of the importance of the asset that the corridor is, and it's a recognition that an action had to take place in a short run or risk losing Penn access on a permanent basis. What we have is 800 feet of a lot of concrete and rebar. You can't see it today because over the top of it is entirely decked over as part of the Hudson Yards project. But it is a concrete encasement that is now available and ready to accept trains at the time that a future tunnel project could complete it and tie in. It's also put in a location where it ties into the last two remaining tracks in the Penn Station complex that could accept new tunnels coming into it. Without preserving it and without building it in such a way that we could allow that, then providing relief to Penn Station, let's not talk about capacity for the moment, it's simply providing relief to allow it to sustain continued operations would have been forfeited. And so we're delighted to be able to talk about this and say the first segment is all but done, and the second segment under the 11th Ave Viaduct is now underway. There's too many pictures of damage from Superstorm Sandy. This is what a tunnel under one of the East River or Hudson River looks like as it's getting flooded. Although it was pumped out, and it was a heroic effort to pump it out within a week and bring service back, the 13 million gallons of seawater left permanent effects and damages on the system. And what we found is that the salt and chloride deposits from the seawater are now penetrating through the concrete that is part of the structure that you see there. They're entering into the conduit and the electrical distribution systems, and there is no practical way to stop that process without stripping everything out of these tunnels and replacing it anew. It's exactly what happened with the Montague Street tunnels. That's exactly what happened with the Uptown Path tunnels for rebuilding. We face the same identical problems. The evidence is stark, frankly, about seeing this. We had a trip earlier this week with Senator Booker and Administrator Feinberg, and they saw firsthand the level of damage. It's very sobering, frankly, to see